Hello there and welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper. I have a card video for you, so get comfy and let's get crafty. I will be working with this Paintbrush Studios Choose Hope. I have the stencils and the die cut, but I don't have the stamps. So we're going to do a little bit of ink blending and play around and see what we can pull out with that. I also have a little trick I want to try with the Detail Stencil for the floral. So the first thing I've done is pull out my Wendy Vecchi Make Art Station. It's a little magnetic platform workspace. And I've lined the ruler up along the grid on the bottom to make sure that my paper is straight. And then I can tape it down with some low-tack tape. I'm also using the magnets to hold the stencil in place. And the first thing I'm going to do is use my blending brushes. And I haven't used them in a hot minute, so I need to get a lot of ink on them. They're kind of dried out. But I'm using the first stencil in the flowers. So this more open, the more space there is going to be your lighter color, and you'll progressively get darker in color with the smaller amount of open space through this stencil. Sorry, words are hard. It's Saturday morning, my kids are all hanging around, my husband's out in the yard working on a patio, and I'm sitting in the air conditioning completely loving it and still stumbling over words. Okay, stencil number 2 is going to be the inside detail part of the flowers. And I'm just using the little registration marks in the top corner of the stencil to line them up with my cardstock. My stencils are then held in position with the magnets, and I'm going with the darker color. And I'm using altenew inks here because they had the orange color that I liked, and I was going for an orange-yellow flower. And I'm going to just go ahead and ink blend that. I'm going both from left to right and right to left so that I don't have weird blobs in my blending. And the third flower stencil I'm going to put on hold for a minute. So the fourth stencil, or the first leaf stencil, and this is when I realized I may not have started my flower right side up, but it's okay. This stencil that is the first leaf stencil masks out the floral images. So I can take a light green and fill in all the leaves that are around this bunch of flowers. I am using, I think it's fern ink is the color of this green. It is a true green, but it does tend to lean yellow just a little bit if there's not another darker color or another color of green with it. And that's okay. It's one of my favorite greens that I have in my ink stash. The second leaf stencil is the Detail Stencil, and this took me a minute to line up. It's smaller, it's a little more detail, a little more difficult. It is just the stems and then the veining through the leaves. So it's kind of important to be a little more precise with this stencil than maybe it is to be as precise with some of the other layers of the stencils, but that's okay. I am using Evergreen, which is more of a blue leaning green, so it worked out kind of perfect. Now for the details on this flower, I want to use embossing powder. And I tried a couple of different methods. I tried squishing the embossing powder through the stencil, and that didn't work. I tried using a blending brush with embossing ink through the stencil, and that didn't work. So I'm going to use my Versamark Marker, which I totally forgot I had in my drawer. So this marker has two nibs, and I'm going to go ahead and use the wider nib to go through the openings in the stencil. And I think this would have worked a little bit more precisely if my stencils didn't still have pixie spray on the back of them. So even though I used the Cottontail embossing preparation powder brush thingy that I can't remember the name of, there was still some embossing powder that stuck to the cardstock, and that's because the pixie spray from my stencils kind of left a residue. So while it is not as fine lined and detailed as I thought maybe it would be, once I heat set the embossing powder with my heat gun, I was okay with it. And like I said, it's not the most defined or fine detailed, but it's okay. So I went back with my embossing powder again, or my, what is this called? It's called a powder tool, the embossing powder tool. There we go. And I'm taking the finer nib on my Versamarker, and I'm going down one side of the darker green stems and veinings. I'm not trying to cover it all up. I'm just trying to add a little bit of this rose gold embossing powder to the leaves as well, just for a little bit more shine, because all cards need a little bit of sparkle and shine, right? I am taking this loose brush and brushing off the residue. I use a stiffer, finer brush if I need to get into the in between something, but the edges, fluffy brush works just fine. And you can see how it's a little bit shiny and pretty. So now I need to, or I want to, go ahead and cut this out with the coordinating die. Now, my paper is warped from the heat embossing, and the die has a very small border. So I'm going to tape it down. I have a couple of pieces. I just tore up that piece of blue painter's tape, the low-tack tape that I had taped my cardstock down with, into pieces. And it did take me a hot minute to get this lined up. In fact, I edited out the first 2 times that I lined it up because it was just not quite lined up just right. There is one section that is kind of in the middle between some of the leaves and flowers that this die cuts out and doesn't leave a hole. And I wanted to make sure I had that lined up properly. So now that I've had that all taped down and lined up, I can put it through my die cut machine. And now it's time to assemble the card. So I have a green cardstock and a pattern paper that is kind of a off-white, kind of a gray tonal off-white with some leaves and flowers on it in a dark gray. And I'm cutting the cardstock to 4 1/4 by 11, and I'm cutting a piece of this pattern paper to be 4 by 5 and 1/4 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and score that card base at 5 1/2. This will create a top folding A2 size card. It's a US A2. Makes it 4 1/4 inches wide by 5 1/2 inches tall. I'm going to go ahead and crease that nicely with my bone folder and place my pattern paper down there. And this is a really pretty pattern paper, but I'm not in love with that. So I paused and went through my stash and found a pattern paper that is more subtle. It reads like a solid, and there's some texture to it. I felt like that worked a little bit better. And then I pulled out this Concord and Nights Mix and Match Everyday Sentiment stamp set. And I have the stamp in the die, and I have stamped it once before, and I think I've only used a couple of the words. So I just went ahead and laid out all the words that I had left and picked a couple of different sentiments to add to this card. I wanted to make it, I don't have any specific reason for or purpose right now for this card, so I wanted to make it pretty occasion generic. I opted to use those 2 words, "You are wonderful," because that could be for anything. I did decide to pull out my Dollar Tree foam squares and add foam squares to the back of this flower, and I added a ton. I cut some in half to get down those skinny leaves. I mean, there are a ton of foam squares on the back of this. It took a hot minute, and you're welcome for not making you watch that. I am now going to adhere my sentiment. I will put a foam square in the corner that hangs off of the flower bouquet and liquid glue on the rest of the back of the sentiment strip. I'm also going to take a little dot of liquid glue and put it on top of the foam tape square, just so that I have a minute or two to wiggle it into place and make sure it's straight. And I am using my reverse tweezers to make sure that my fingers are out of the way and I can see what I'm doing. And theoretically, I can hold on to this without getting any glue on my fingers, because you know how much I love that. If you've ever watched any of my other videos where I've used liquid glue, you remember that it is my frenemy. Okay, now for the inside, I have a piece of copy paper that has been trimmed down to 4 by 5 and 1/4 inches. And this is my card. It didn't take me a ton of time to do, especially when I edited out all the stuff that didn't work right. But I really do like how using embossing powder through that last detail stencil worked. So give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Leave me a comment. Have you ever tried using embossing powder through your stencils? Thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. I've added a couple of other videos I think you would enjoy, as well as a subscribe button. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I would be grateful if you did. I hope you have a really great day.